I moved into Briarwood Heights 10 years ago after retiring from a 35-year career in military-grade cybersecurity. I figured I'd spend my golden years sanding wood, sipping bourbon, and feeding the squirrels from my back porch. My place is just outside the HOA boundary. Literally outside. I'm not even a dues-paying member. My property was grandfathered in, bought decades before Briarwood became a vinyl-sided utopia of petty tyranny and matching mailboxes. I mostly kept to myself. I smiled at the dog walkers. I waved to the neighborhood watch ladies. I even fixed a few broken sprinkler boxes for some of the younger families. Life was good. Then Karen moved in. Yes, her name is actually Karen. And yes, she embodies every single syllable of that stereotype like it's a job description. She's the self-appointed queen of the HOA board. Though let's be real, she wasn't appointed so much as manipulated her way into power during a shady election where two of the candidates suddenly withdrew the night before the vote. Karen came in like a wrecking ball in Lululemon. Suddenly, every blade of grass had to be exactly 2.75 inches tall. Christmas lights were banned before December 10th. And don't even get me started on the $20 violation notices for visible trash cans, even if they were empty and on the side of your own house. But I stayed under the radar. I wasn't part of the HOA, and as long as I didn't poke the bear, I figured I'd be fine. I figured wrong. Last summer, Briarwood decided to upgrade their internet infrastructure. Apparently, the whole neighborhood had been dealing with spotty Wi-Fi, Zoom calls dropping, kids whining about laggy Fortnite, suburban chaos. Karen announced a new community-funded fiber system at the HOA meeting, claiming it would be minimally invasive. What she meant was they were going to run their entire fiber line through my property, without asking, without paying, and definitely without a permit. I first noticed something was off when I found a strange spool of cable sitting just outside my shed. I assumed it was a mistake. Maybe a delivery guy got lost. I didn't think much of it. Until the next morning, when I walked into my shed and nearly tripped over a brand new junction box mounted on the inside wall. Not only had they drilled through my shed wall, they'd also screwed hardware into my interior framing, zip-tied conduit along my shelves, and left sawdust all over my tool bench. My bench. I called the number listed on the work order taped to the cable. Some contractor in a van answered and casually said, "Oh yeah, HOA told us it was part of the install. That shed's on common utility easement." Spoiler alert, it's not. I own every square foot, including the shed. My deed says so. No easements, no right-of-ways, no shared anything. I confronted Karen the next day at the HOA clubhouse. She was hosting yoga for mindful moms, or some such nonsense, but I waited. When I showed her the photos and asked why no one had asked for permission, she rolled her eyes and said, "Oh, don't be difficult, Frank. It's for the good of the neighborhood. You don't even use that old thing, do you?" That old thing is where I built custom guitars, repaired antique radios, and stored about $10,000 worth of precision tools. She told me with a straight face that if I touched the cable, I'd be fined. And if I damaged it, I'd be reported for vandalism. That's when I smiled. I hadn't felt that smile in years, not since we caught a Russian mole trying to install a keylogger in a NATO comms room in '89. They wanted to use my space like it was theirs? Fine. Let's see how they like what I do with their network. Over the next week, I played the role of confused old man beautifully, wandering out to my shed every morning with a coffee mug and a half-zipped hoodie, scratching my head like I'd misplaced my hammer, all while tracing the line. Turns out the cable didn't just run through my shed. Oh no. It started at the HOA clubhouse, crossed two fences, dipped under a gravel path, and then ran across my land for a good 80 feet before cutting through my shed and hopping into the utility pole behind my garage. That's when it split into a daisy chain that served a good 10 houses on my street. That meant they weren't just trespassing, they were relying on me. Their whole precious fiber upgrade, it was dependent on that cable staying right where it was, hidden in plain sight, on land they didn't own. And Karen knew there was no accidental easement here. The real kicker? I looked up the HOA budget records, publicly available, God bless the sunshine laws. And guess what? They'd charge the community full price for a professionally permitted install using public utility space. But what they actually paid for was a budget rate hybrid route that cut across private land, mine, to save them a few $1,000s. I sent a polite email to the HOA's generic contact address. Hi there, I noticed some wiring on my property related to the new internet system. Can you confirm whether HOA obtained any permits or easement rights for installation? I kept it sugar-coated. And what did I get back? A form letter, probably written by Karen herself. Dear resident, the infrastructure was approved via Resolution 14B of the board. Your cooperation is assumed under Community Bylaw 3.7 for shared services. Any attempt to obstruct the system will be considered a breach of Section 9.2, tampering with community assets. Your cooperation is assumed. Oh, honey, that's not how property law works in the United States. So I printed that email, highlighted it, filed it, evidence. A week later, Karen sent a maintenance guy to inspect the junction box in my shed. She didn't tell me, of course. I caught the poor kid halfway through opening the latch with a flathead screwdriver. He jumped like I'd shot him. I was told it was common access, he stammered. I just smiled, handed him a bottle of Gatorade, and told him to stay hydrated. I let him finish, let them think I was still cooperating, because the truth was I had a plan at 3 a.m. The next morning, because nothing good starts at 3 a.m., I walked out to the shed with a flashlight and a pair of insulated cutters. Snip. That satisfying little click when the line goes dead. Music to my ears. But I didn't just kill the cable. I redirected it. See, I left the stub inside the shed looking clean. But what the HOA didn't know is that I looped their line through a signal diverter box, one I'd used in a training exercise back in the day. To them, it would seem like a connectivity issue, a technical hiccup. They'd call the ISP. The ISP would come out, scratch their heads, try to trace the issue, and tell them everything looked fine up to my shed. Meanwhile, I'd set up a mini signal sniffer to monitor who was trying to connect through it. Which houses? What devices? For the record, I didn't look at anyone's traffic. That would be illegal. But signal strength and MAC addresses? Totally fair game. Over the next few days, the complaints began. One neighbor couldn't access her telehealth appointments. Another smart fridge started rebooting every hour. The HOA's fancy Zoom meetings, static-filled messes of frozen faces and muted screams. Karen sent out an emergency bulletin. We are aware of intermittent issues with the new Wi-Fi infrastructure. Please be patient as we coordinate with technical support. I was very patient. So patient, in fact, that I waited until their desperation boiled over, and they finally sent another tech crew to dig up the line for a full replacement. That's when I hit them with the bombshell. On HOA letterhead, I sent them a registered envelope with the following: a formal notice of trespass photos of the illegal cable route, a copy of the highlighted email where they admitted to assuming consent, a demand for $7,800 in retroactive easement rent and damages, and a warning that further trespass would trigger legal action for encroachment and property abuse. And I CC'd it to the county zoning board and the ISP. And the two board members I knew Karen had bullied off the board last year. It was surgical. 2 days later, I got a knock on the door, not from Karen, but from a young man in khakis and a sport coat, HOA lawyer. He asked if we could talk this out. I told him sure. I'd talk for $10,000 flat, my legal fees covered, and a written agreement that no HOA contractor, board member, or subcontractor would ever set foot on my property again. And if they didn't agree, I'd be contacting every single resident in Briarwood with a full report of the misused funds in illegal installations. With photos, with receipts. He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. He just left, looking like someone had just whispered audit into his soul, and I waited. I started getting voicemails. First friendly, "Hey Frank, we'd love to resolve this amicably." Then passive-aggressive, "We're disappointed in your unwillingness to contribute to the community." Then threatening, "If this continues, we may be forced to pursue damages." I didn't respond to a single one, because I knew something they didn't. Karen had violated zoning codes, failed to secure utility permits, and committed budget fraud. I had the paperwork, and I was ready to go nuclear. 1 week after my cease and desist landed in HOA HQ like a flaming bag of legal fire, I got another envelope. This one hand-delivered and sealed with what looked like someone's leftover cricket sticker that said, "Official HOA action." It was a notice of intent to levy fines against me for $250 per day for interference with neighborhood infrastructure, non-cooperation with board-sanctioned utility upgrades, and my personal favorite, deliberate disruption of community harmony. I say Karen had signed it herself, in glitter gel pen, no joke. I nearly choked on my coffee. This woman had the gall to fine me, someone who isn't even in the HOA, for not letting them use my property without permission. That's like breaking into someone's garage, stealing their lawnmower, and then sending them an invoice for refusing to share yard equipment. Now, if this were any other HOA, cooler heads might have prevailed. But this was Karen's kingdom, and she'd surrounded herself with a hand-picked group of yes-men who nodded faster than bobbleheads in an earthquake. She called an emergency board meeting. Of course, I wasn't invited, but I didn't need to be. I had neighbors. Some who were fed up, some who'd gotten their own Karen-shaped bruises in the past. One of them, bless her soul, left a voicemail. "Frank, just a heads up. Karen wants to declare your shed a public hazard. She says it's a fire risk due to unknown equipment inside and is pushing for forced inspection." And just like that, we went from passive-aggressive letters to active aggression. A real one. Showed up with a clipboard, a badge, and a half-apologetic look that said, "I know this is BS, but I'm just doing my job." Turns out someone, cough Karen cough, had filed a community concern that my shed housed unpermitted electrical modifications that could pose a threat to adjacent homes. This was laughable on a few levels. One, the shed has its own circuit, professionally installed and inspected in 2014. Two, I don't store gasoline, propane, or even lighter fluid in there. Three, and I don't need a permit to run a soldering iron and a dehumidifier. Still, the fire marshal poked around, asked polite questions, and finally muttered, "You mind if I write this off as inspected, no issue found, so I don't have to come back?" I offered him a Gatorade too. 2 days later, I noticed something odd. A shiny black orb mounted on the HOA clubhouse roof, angled suspiciously in the direction of my backyard. A security camera, then another, and another. By the end of the week, there were 4 new cameras pointed at my side of the property. Karen had installed surveillance equipment aimed directly at my home. Now, I'm no conspiracy nut, but I also know a surveillance trap when I see one. Karen wasn't monitoring safety. She was trying to catch me in the act. Of what? I'm not sure. Maybe she thought I'd steal back the cable she already stole. It didn't matter. I had one more ace up my sleeve. One afternoon, I took a nice slow drive to the county clerk's office. Brought with me every document I had, photos, HOA emails, property deed, installation invoices. And I asked one simple question. What would I need to file a formal complaint about illegal utility installations, surveillance equipment, and zoning violations on adjacent property? The clerk, a cheerful woman named Denise with sparkly reading glasses, smiled like I just asked her to the prom. "Oh, honey," she said, "you'd be amazed how often this happens. Let me get you the form." I filed 3, one with the zoning department, unpermitted installations, one with the code enforcement office, illegal surveillance, and one with the State Internet Service Oversight Board, reporting suspected fraudulent billing and unauthorized infrastructure routing. Then I made copies, sent them to Karen, certified mail, and I waited. 2 days later, my neighbor, Tom, retired school principal, saw Karen outside my fence, yelling into her phone. Apparently, she'd gotten word that the county had opened an investigation into the HOA's infrastructure project. The zoning board wanted to see permits she didn't have, and the ISP had started an internal audit after discovering the network was routed through non-permitted private land. Oh, and residents were beginning to ask why their HOA fees were going up when their Wi-Fi was still trash. The walls were closing in. So what did Karen do? She escalated again. I wasn't invited, but a dozen flyers went up overnight across the neighborhood. Emergency community meeting, HOA infrastructure security and individual sabotage. Tuesday, 7 p.m., Briarwood Clubhouse. Open to all residents except restricted individuals. I was a restricted individual, apparently, which is funny because when a neighbor brought their phone and live streamed the whole thing for me, I got a front row seat to the circus. Karen stood up in her best power blazer and told the crowd that a disgruntled property owner had deliberately sabotaged the community network, cost the HOA thousands in repair fees, and endangered public safety. She didn't name me, but she didn't have to. That's when one of the board members, one of the two she hadn't completely broken yet, stood up and asked, "Karen, do we have documentation showing we had permission to run cable through his land?" Dead silence. Another asked, "Can we see the permits? For the cameras? For the fiber install?" More silence. Karen tried to redirect, but the crowd wasn't buying it. The seeds had been planted. The anger wasn't at me anymore. It was at her. And then came the twist. Right in the middle of the meeting, a man walked in, mid-40s, navy blue windbreaker, County Zoning Compliance Division. He introduced himself, said he was there to speak with the HOA board about ongoing investigations into permit violations and potential misuse of community funds. Karen looked like she'd swallowed a lemon soaked in battery acid. That night, I sat on my porch, sipping bourbon, listening to the HOA clubhouse door slam again and again as people stormed out. My phone buzzed with messages from neighbors. "Frank, holy hell, that was insane. She's done. People are furious. You should have seen her face when the auditor said fraud." And then one final text from the neighbor who filmed the meeting. "She's calling a vote to remove you from the HOA. I wrote back, "I'm not in the HOA. 3 dots. Then, LMAO. Let me back up 72 hours. After the HOA debacle, Karen tried to pass off as a meeting. Residents started talking, really talking. Group chats lit up. The community Facebook page turned into a wildfire. People who hadn't spoken to each other in years were suddenly swapping stories about how Karen had fined them, humiliated them, bullied them into compliance. Turns out I wasn't the first one she tried to strong-arm, just the first one who'd fought back. That Friday, a different board member, Lisa, a quiet accountant type who'd never once voted no in a meeting, posted this. "I'd like to formally motion for a community-wide forum to review board conduct, spending records, and pending legal matters." It got 163 likes in 4 hours. That's all it took. The clubhouse was packed. Folding chairs filled every inch of carpet. Folks leaned against walls, sipping lukewarm coffee and pretending not to watch the train wreck we all knew was coming. I stayed near the back, didn't speak, just listened. Karen took the podium in her usual beige blazer, hair sprayed into a helmet, clutching a thick binder labeled Incident Documentation. Real formal, real rehearsed. Her voice, shaky, just a little, but still loud enough to bark out. "I'd like to begin with a timeline of recent disturbances caused by a certain resident who has refused to cooperate with community policies." That's when Lisa cut in. "Karen," she said, calm as ice water, "you've been served with a zoning investigation, 2 code enforcement violations, and 3 resident complaints. This meeting isn't about Frank. It's about you." And the room erupted. Lisa walked straight to the projector. Yes, they'd brought a projector this time, and clicked through a slide deck that could have been titled, "How to Embezzle from Your Neighbors Without Getting Caught, but Then Get Caught Anyway." Slide 1. A comparison of the HOA's claimed $32,000 fiber install versus actual contractor invoice, $12,400. Slide 2. Breakdown of board retreats in Florida, billed as infrastructure site visits. Slide 3. A copy of an email, unmistakably from Karen, telling the ISP to just go through the back lot. The old man won't know the difference. People gasped. A few cursed out loud, and I just stood there, arms folded, letting the warmth of long-awaited justice settle into my bones like a good bourbon on a winter night. Someone yelled, "Let Frank speak." Karen started to protest, but she was drowned out by clapping. So I stepped up. No notes, no slideshow, just me and about 100 people who were tired of being played. "I didn't want to fight," I started. "I moved here to be left alone. But when someone drills through my property without asking, lies about it, threatens me, and then tries to fine me for protecting my own land, yeah, I'm going to fight back." I held up a manila envelope. "This is a certified letter from my attorney. It outlines in detail the trespass, the damages, and the civil claims I could file today. But I'm giving the board one chance to do the right thing, admit fault, remove the cable, and step down." A pause. "And if you don't," I turned to Karen, "then I'll see you in court, and I'll bring friends." Lisa stood back up, voice strong now. I motioned to remove Karen Phillips from her position as board president, Effective immediately, pending investigation. Seconded, voted. The tally wasn't even close. 92-8. Karen sat frozen, blinking too fast, gripping her binder like it held the last scraps of her dignity. Then she stood, slowly, and muttered, "You'll regret this. You don't know what you've done." But nobody followed her. She walked out to the sound of folding chairs squeaking and one old man in the back, me, clearing his throat loud enough to be petty. The next week was like watching someone slowly scrub a stain off a white carpet. Ted, the HOA's new interim president, sent a notice out. All HOA infrastructure not permitted through county records will be removed. A full audit is underway. Residents will receive refund checks where applicable. The cable running through my shed? Gone within 48 hours. No fanfare, no apology, just a guy in a hard hat who showed up with side cutters and said, "I think this belongs to you." He left the coiled cable by my door like some kind of postmodern art sculpture. I hung it in my garage, might turn it into wind chimes. 2 weeks later, a thick envelope arrived. Inside, a formal apology from the new board, a $10,000 cashier's check for property damage and unauthorized use, a second check for $1,000 marked community goodwill gesture, and most satisfying of all, a notarized agreement stating the HOA forfeits all rights to access, modify, surveil, or otherwise interfere with my property ever again. I framed that last one, hung it next to the thermostat. Feels right seeing it every time I check the weather. Funny thing happens when you take down a tyrant. People breathe again. The couple across the street brought me cookies. The teenager next door asked if I could teach her how to solder. Even the cranky guy on the corner, who once threatened to sue me over a tree limb, left a 6-pack of IPA on my porch. I started having neighbors over on Sundays. We sit in lawn chairs, swap stories, share laughs. Someone asked what I'll do now that the war is over. I said, build birdhouses. But I kept the old router just in case. The residents of Briarwood, well, about 27 of them, filed a class action civil suit against her. Fraud, embezzlement, breach of fiduciary duty. And while the HOA board couldn't pursue criminal charges directly, the county DA opened an investigation after the audit landed on their desk. Turns out Karen had done similar things in her last HOA in Tampa before she quietly moved away. This time, she wasn't going anywhere quietly. One morning, mid-September, a U-Haul appeared in front of Karen's house. No party, no goodbye wave, just her, loading boxes in a ratty hoodie and sunglasses, head down like someone in the witness protection program. She didn't look at anyone. Not at the kids drawing chalk hearts on the sidewalk, not at the elderly couple walking their Shih Tzu past her mailbox, and definitely not at me, standing in my front yard with a leaf blower I absolutely did not need to use at that moment. Let's just say the breeze was well-timed. She was gone by sundown. The strange thing about a tyrant falling is how quiet everything gets afterward. No more surprise notices taped to doors. No more cameras swiveling from rooftops. No more angry HOA newsletters scolding residents for unauthorized Halloween decor. Instead, we got a new committee, elected fairly, transparently. Ted became president, Lisa stayed on as treasurer, and they brought in real professionals to handle community infrastructure. You know, licensed contractors, permits, people who don't install routers with duct tape and prayer. They refunded a portion of dues, set up a resident suggestion box, even hosted a neighbor's night out BBQ, where I got asked to tell my story. Twice. Okay, 3 times. My shed, yes, that shed, became something of a local landmark. Neighbors started calling it the Wi-Fi Fortress. One kid painted a tiny wooden sign that said, "No trespassing or we call Frank," and hung it on my fence. I left it there. I started offering small workshops, just one Saturday a month, to teach folks how to do basic repairs, soldering, or install their own home mesh Wi-Fi. Nothing fancy, just me, a few lawn chairs, and some well-earned trust. And here's the best part. For the first time since I moved in, people waved with both hands. Not just because they had to, but because they wanted to. Oh, I kept tabs. Turns out Karen moved in with a cousin in Arizona. Tried to join another HOA board in a retirement community outside Tucson. Last I heard, she was strongly encouraged to resign after attempting to fine someone for having non-compliant succulents. Some folks never learn. The lawsuit, still pending. But with the documentation we all helped compile, her chances are slim. She might not end up behind bars. But she sure won't be sitting at the head of any conference table again anytime soon. Last week, I sat out on the porch, same as always. Birds chirping, grill smoke in the air, kids yelling about popsicles and bike races. I looked across the street at the clubhouse, no longer a fortress of HOA oppression, just a place with yoga mats and bake sales. And I thought, this is what a neighborhood should feel like. If you'd told me a year ago that I'd end up at war with a suburban despot over a Wi-Fi cable, I would have laughed. But that's the thing about people like Karen. They don't count on resistance. They assume silence means surrender. They think politeness equals permission. But I've got news for all the Karens out there. Some of us might be retired, but we're not done. We read fine print. We keep records. We know our rights. And when you push us too far, well, let's just say we don't push back. We document, and then we bury you in it. Let's take a step back. Let's imagine for one brief, generous moment that Karen had paused somewhere along the way. Maybe right before she drilled a hole through my shed, or maybe before she signed off on surveillance cameras aimed at my backyard like she was the NSA. Let's pretend Karen had asked herself the golden question. Wait, am I the villain here? Because here's the truth. This whole mess didn't have to happen. There were so many off-ramps on the road to disaster. So many chances to choose sanity over power trips. So today we're not just telling a story, we're offering a how-to guide for any future Karen watching this. You'd think this would be obvious. But no, Karen saw an old man's shed and thought, free utility box. Newsflash, if it's not on the HOA's land, you need permission. Easement rights, permits, a nice knock on the door with a plate of cookies. Something. If Karen had simply asked, hey Frank, would you mind if we ran a cable here? She might have been shocked to hear, sure, but let's do it right. Instead, she went with, he won't notice. Which, by the way, is the same mindset raccoons have before breaking into your attic. Karen didn't run the HOA, she ruled it, with fear, fines, and flyers in Comic Sans. But real leadership isn't about barking rules or lording over lawn length. It's about trust, transparency, earning respect, not demanding it. If your neighbors start whispering behind your back and printing out bylaws in self-defense, that's not order. That's mutiny waiting to happen. Karen underestimated me. She saw flannel shirts, woodworking, a quiet old guy with a push mower, and figured I'd fold like a paper plate. She didn't know I spent 35 years designing secure comm systems for the government. She didn't know I'd outlived 3 supervisors, 5 attempted hacks, and 2 marriages. She didn't know that quiet doesn't mean clueless. To every Karen out there, check your assumptions before you go swinging your clipboard. You never know who's got the receipts, the resolve, and a county clerk on speed dial. There's always that moment, the pivot point, where a smart person might say, you know what? Maybe I went too far. Karen had plenty of chances when the first cable got cut, when the first neighbor asked questions, when the board started shifting in their seats during her speeches. But instead of pausing, she doubled down. She called meetings, sent threats, spun lies. She didn't just go down swinging, she went down swinging in the dark. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't fight harder. It's admit you messed up. Karen probably thought karma would come in the form of an angry mob or flaming bags of dog poop on her porch. She didn't expect Lisa with a PowerPoint, or a county auditor with a binder, or a quiet man with a long memory and an even longer paper trail. But that's the beauty of it. Karma doesn't yell, it knocks politely, and when you ignore it, it shows up again with backup. At the end of the day, this isn't just a story about HOA drama or internet cables. It's about what happens when ego outweighs empathy, when control matters more than community. Karen could have been a respected leader. Instead, she became a cautionary tale. So whether you're on a board, in a meeting, or just thinking about writing a strongly worded letter to your neighbor about their flamingo lawn ornaments, take a breath, knock on the door, start with kindness. It costs you nothing and might save you from being the star of the next HOA disaster video. We want to hear from you. Have you ever dealt with a Karen-style neighbor? What would you have done differently? Should HOA boards have term limits? Would you let someone run a cable through your shed? Drop a comment below, like if you've ever dreamed of serving sweet legal revenge. Subscribe so you don't miss the next wild HOA story. We've got plenty more where this came from. And remember, you can't spell neighborhood without neighbor, but you can spell Karen without common sense. Thanks for watching. Stay petty, legally, of course.